Hey, welcome to SHS 367, Language Science, as you might know it. I'm Dr. Patton, and I'll be your instructor. Probably, I'm assuming that some of you might have had 205 with me over the summer, and maybe 375 just this last session. If so, welcome back. This is a bit different from both of those classes. I guess they're all very different from each other, really. So the schedule, however, is pretty much the same. I try to keep sort of the same thing going in all the classes. We're going to have 4 exams, and the lowest one is dropped. So what you could do is, if you really like the score that you got on the first 3 exams, like if you got 90, between 90 and 100, say, and you didn't want to take the final, then you don't have to take the final. That becomes the one that's dropped. So the last one is a cumulative final. I should tell you that. So you'll have 2 weeks and then an exam, 3 weeks and then an exam, and then 2 weeks and an exam. And then your final exam comes up the same time as that last exam. So you'll know all of your scores before you decide to take the 4th exam. And then if you don't do well on 1 week accidentally, of course you can take the final and the lowest score is dropped. There's going to be 12 quizzes, and each of those you have 2 attempts for. So the way that I think that you should do it, the way that's most beneficial, I think, for you, is the first time through, don't use, it is an open note quiz, but don't use any of your notes the first time. See what you know, see what you remember from your readings and the podcast. This is a podcast class also. That's definitely something I should have mentioned. Most of this is going to be done with me in my closet with my trusty microphone here. So there are PDFs for you to, if you want to look at them, look on with those while you're listening to the lectures. You can go ahead. If you want to look at them after the lectures, that's also great. And if you are really into podcasts and you just enjoy listening to podcasts and you can take in information that way, then that's something you can do as well. Anyway, so you're going to have quizzes, and the first thing you should do is see if you got the information from the podcast, from the chapter that's assigned for that week. Take the quiz, see how you do. Make a note of the questions that you got wrong, so you can study that again, and then the second time, to get your full points, use all the resources at your disposal, but then you'll know what to study when the exam comes around. There's also 8 homework assignments for this class. Most of them are just short assignments, sort of like what you're doing, talking about your favorite book that's up already. And then there's a couple, well, actually, that's more like the discussion boards. So most of the short assignments are just going to be an activity that you do, and then you turn in, the result of that activity. Then I've got a couple of discussion board things, just a few, none of those typical really terrible discussion boards where you have to respond to some question that I give you and then, respond to everybody else. These are more fun and more like talking about your favorite book, but more, about course content. Okay. There might be extra credit. Usually what I do is I offer extra credit for participating in studies. I know this is an online class, but a lot of times there are some online studies that you can participate in as well. Research is kind of weird this semester. Even online studies don't seem to be in as full force as they usually are. So if I don't have anything to offer you guys of someone else in the department's research or my own research, I'll try to have at least one non-research thing for you to do if there's no study that comes up. So we'll see. I have one in mind that I'm thinking about running. So probably that'll be what you end up doing, at least one of those. But if I get behind and I can't get that up, there'll be something. The Disability Resource Center is now called SAILS. And if you have any trouble, with test anxiety and stuff like that, it might be a good idea to get in contact with them. I talk about this a lot in my in-person classes, and not a whole lot in my, online classes. But I think that it is something that I should talk about because I think it's not used as much for the online students. And I know, like, in my classes, test anxiety hopefully doesn't come up very often because I give you, a test is open usually for a whole week for you to take. So, and there's no time limit on it. So, hopefully that allays as much of your test anxiety as it can, aside from having the, lockdown browser and the camera on. But other classes might not. And so if you're an online student, maybe they could get you extra time, different testing methods. If you have other disorders that, can impact your ability to do well in your online classes, they can help you get some sort of accommodation. You can find their website on the ASU website if you just search for SAILS. That's their new name. So if you search for SAILS, that'll bring up their website. And there's links everywhere to contact somebody. We're still doing a Y grade because we're still, kind of in pandemic mode. So if there's a reason why any of you might want a Y grade, send me an email. This will probably be closer to the end of the semester. I'm assuming nobody wants to immediately say I want a Y grade. You can do that, up until the last, when I have you look over your final grades. You can request your Y grade if you want to. It counts as a Y instead of the letter grade. So if you have a whole bunch of A's and you get a C for some reason, you can request a Y. You don't get credit hours for that class, so that could be something weird with your credits that you're building up for your degree. So be aware of all the factors with the Y grade before you ask for it. Okay, so let's see. This is usually something I only talk about with my in-person classes, although maybe it's useful to talk about here too. We'll go over it more briefly. But I mean, you guys are going into an area where you're going to be like a health adjacent. Well, you're not a health adjacent. You're a health professional. You're a medically adjacent professional. That's what SLPAs and SLPs and AUDs are considered. And so you're in that, medical type field, especially if you're a PhD. If you're one of the very few that are going to do the job that I'm doing, you're, going to be a scientist. So somewhat less medically adjacent, but definitely a scientist. And so because of that, we all have this responsibility to educate ourselves about up-to-date health information and promote healthy behavior in the people around us, and also science-based practices. It's really important, now. There's a lot of crazy misinformation, sometimes foreign disinformation that gets into these things. So it's important to know exactly what's going on with all that. So I want to talk about a couple myths that are floating around on the internet and other unsavory places. Which the first one is that scientists aren't objective, or that we have a bias. And that's actually true. We do. But the thing that we're taught to combat that is that we have a bias. Everybody does. So that is ingrained into our training, is to understand that you can't separate yourself from your biases. So instead of allowing our ideas to guide our research, what we do is we have to let our ideas guide our research to some extent. We can come up with hypotheses that way, but what we do is we let the data guide the answer to that question, and we let the statistical tests that we know how to do guide us to get to that answer. So it doesn't matter what your hypothesis is. If the data doesn't confirm the hypothesis, then it must be wrong. One thing that goes with that is I was originally, back when I was a cognitive scientist, I guess I still am a cognitive scientist, but when I was, actively doing cognitive science work, I got a whole bunch of data on gun violence, and I was trying to see how the U.S. Looked in comparison to other countries. And there are, at least two large vocal sides to this gun violence debate in the United States. And one side says, you look at global gun violence data, you can see that the United States is doing way worse. The other side says, no, they're not. And when I analyzed it, being, I had a way that I thought it was going to go. But being scientific about it, I didn't allow my bias to, impact how I was looking at it. And what ended up happening was it doesn't really fit any narrative. The United States is such an outlier in terms of gun ownership, gun death, all sorts of stuff that you can't learn anything by comparing it to other countries. That doesn't support anybody's story. Basically, it just supports that's not a good way to look at your data. You get kind of if you're comparing like gun ownership rates and gun deaths in a country, there's a line that you can run a pretty good correlation on, but then the United States is like way off. It's one tiny point way out in the middle of nowhere. And if you have heard anything, the Malcolm Gladwell book about outliers, or in your statistics classes that I think are probably prerequisites for this, outliers are strange. They do weird things to your data because they add a lot of leverage to it. One thing that a lot of researchers do is they just take the outliers out because there's something strange with that data point. It's messing up the rest of the data. And that's us. That's this country. The United States is like the outlier. So you can't learn anything from other countries, no matter how much either side wants to say that you can. You just can't. You can't apply it to the United States. So there might be a right answer, but that's not the way to get to it. And that's an interesting thing that I ran into. Also, science is a cycle. So this is one of the very few times, coronavirus is one of the very few times that the public is actively seeing the scientific process in action. Usually you don't see this unless you are a scientist or you follow scientific topics. But what always happens is there's an idea, there's some research, we come up with a thought. And that thought might be, hey, it lasts on surfaces for 17 days, right? That was the first thing that we knew. Surfaces looks like it lasts for 17 days. And another thing that we thought was, we're not totally sure if it travels through the air very much, right? We're not sure you need to wear masks, we're not sure. This was like in March, or even before that. And then more studies are done, and we learn, well, maybe it doesn't last on surfaces as long as we thought it did. Oh, it looks like it actually does travel through the air, we need to wear masks. More data comes in, actually wearing masks is really beneficial. Actually, it seems like it only lasts for 3 days on surfaces, that kind of thing. So it seems like we don't know what we're doing, but actually that's the scientific process at work. That's evidence of science actually working, because a study comes out, people are trying to confirm the study or disconfirm it by doing other research centering on the same question. And so if you get multiple confirming reports, as we have with masks that show like people who are wearing masks just don't get the virus, then, or much less, there's much smaller chance, then that's science at work. That's multiple studies reconfirming the same thing. So we can say like that looks like that is true. Now the surfaces thing, how long coronavirus lasts on surfaces, is a little more strange. There's been less research done on that. Like I said, originally it was 17 days, then it went down to 3 days. I just today saw a study that said it could last up to 26 days on surfaces, things like on your phone. So that one's still a little unsure. But anyway, regardless, having testable and falsifiable hypotheses is the only way that we can actually like find truths. We have to be doing this process. That's the way that we learn things, is coming up with ideas and testing them, and sometimes being wrong. It's okay to be wrong. I mean, you have to, it's like maybe not a 50-50 chance. Hopefully we're somewhat better at making hypotheses than 50-50, but it doesn't matter because we're confirming them and then coming up with other ideas from the data. That's really the only way to make scientific progress, to advance society, to learn what the truth actually is. Okay, number 2, you can lie with statistics. Again, this one actually is true, right? So all these myths, so far, the 2 myths are actually true. It's the nuances that get you into the weeds. And that's exactly the same thing with statistics. So yes, you can lie with statistics. It's not something that you can't manipulate. People can manipulate results with statistics all the time. One thing that you don't know unless you're a researcher, unless you're a statistician, is that there are rules to how you can do statistical analyses. There's like best practices. You can't do 3 comparisons without controlling for doing 3 comparisons, for one thing. So like if you do a t-test or a correlation, if you do 3 of them at once, you have to add something in to account for the fact that you've done 3. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just proof that you only know it if you're a researcher or a statistician. Maybe this is something that was covered in your stats class. Maybe not. I mean, it's something that some people don't learn until they're in graduate school. So anyway, there are these best practices. There's these rules to doing statistics, but the problem is when people are communicating to the general public, they don't know the rules. There's no reason for them to know the rules because there's a bunch of like all these tiny little rules that don't mean anything to anybody that help us get to the right answer. So you can make data look away by violating those rules. And you can say like, well, we did the right thing. Look, here's the original numbers and here's how we get to the answer that we're telling you. And it looks like it makes sense, but again, those rules aren't being adhered to. So how do you get around this if you don't know the rules and you don't know who's lying to you? Well, you have to be wary of anything that isn't in a published journal, right? Anything that's like, even things the news publishes, they don't always get them from the right place. They try to, but they don't always. Things in magazines, preprints, so they might even look like academic journal articles, but they're not. They're just published preprints, which anybody can publish a preprint. Self-published books, memes, those are all suspicious. The only way that you should trust stats is if it's something that's coming from a peer-reviewed journal. I mean, even then, like we talked about, mistakes can be made. We can come up with the wrong answer, but at least you're not having somebody actively lying to you with statistics in a peer-reviewed journal. Or you're much less likely to, I should say. Okay, and then last, we talked about this already, but I think this is really cool and possibly, important for you as well. That masks definitely do work. The myth is that they don't, right? So that's the myth that I want to address here. The myth is also that any mask material is better than nothing. So wearing anything is better than not wearing no mask. So it's kind of 2 different myths from 2 different sides of what shouldn't be a debate, because one of them is just wrong, that I want to address here. So they do work, but it is actually not true that any material is better than nothing. So take a look at this dude over here with this strangely sexy mask that he's wearing, and then it also looks like he's got a priest's collar too. That's a strange. Anyway, these are what I guess the researchers are calling these neck gaiter things, which isn't spelled like alligator. Totally thought it was, and then I learned something when I was looking at the mask research. They might actually be worse than not wearing a mask, possibly. That's one area that just some new data that recently came out. I know those as Buffs. It's a brand name, but that I've got a couple for keeping the sun off of me, and that's how I know them. But anyway, they might be worse than no mask, because essentially what they do is there's not enough layers here to catch all of the droplets, and what it can do is like slice larger droplets into smaller droplets and then actually increase the amount of aerosolized viruses that are going into the air. Possibly. So, I don't know. However, even not including these gator things, there's varying degrees of efficiency with different types of mask construction. So this right here, this picture over here, this is without a mask. So what's going on? Here's a mannequin. They're shooting out this colored air and looking at how far that air can go. It's got little aerosolized particles of luminescent material in it that they're capturing in this light. And you can see that, so without a mask, this is without a mask here, this is going to go out about 12 feet. Twice as far as our usual 6-foot recommendation without a mask. So if you're out without a mask, you might want to be 12 feet away from other people. There are recommendations from different outlets that, different journal articles, I should say, not outlets, that are saying 18 feet. So it's definitely more than the 6 that we are told. So this is without a mask. Then look at this one right here. This is your t-shirt that has like the hair tie inside of it. So you take the t-shirt, you fold it up, you put the hair tie in, you put it on. It's pretty darn good. You can see that this goes much less far out than this one down here. Off the top of my head, I don't totally remember how far this is. I feel like it's about 6 to 8 inches here. A lot better than 12 feet. And then this last one here, this is cotton, 100% cotton, dual layer mask right here. And this is 3 inches from the face, is how far these aerosolized particles can go out. So if you are wanting to control the air that you're breathing out, one of these double layer cotton masks is going to be good for you, and you know, tell the people that you know about this as well. This is a really cool recent paper. If you're interested in it, I can send it to you or put it on Canvas. Okay. We can also talk about yeah, you know what? We will talk about this part here because our class, I should say, our language science, we could also call it psycholinguistics. In fact, from our textbook, you actually know that that's what the textbook is called, psycholinguistics. So it's the same thing. Really, at its heart, it's a psychology class, just mostly looking at linguistics. But not really. We also talk about working memory and top-down, bottom-up processing and all these other things that are really just hallmarks of psychology. So why not talk about a little bit of psychological research here as well? This first study, this ASH study, is there's one person who's brought into a room, and they are asked, like, look at this line right here. This is the reference line. Which of the lines on the right most closely matches the first line? And they say, oh, it's C. And researcher's like, okay, have a seat over here. They bring in a whole bunch more people. The person who's in doing the study thinks that these are people who are also coming in to do the study as well. Actually, they're just people, who are on the payroll of the researcher. And the researcher is going to have them say that B is the correct answer. And the person who they're actually studying is going to give their answer last. So they ask this question, they go around the room, each person says B. They get to the next person, to the person that they're actually testing, and they say, what is the correct line? Which one does the reference match up to? And they say B. Now, there's two different things going on here. Some people say that they go along with the group just to avoid being ostracized, but some people actually report that they started to see B as being the right answer. So somehow the reference line grew, or possibly A, B, and C shrunk, but they actually saw that as the right answer. So the more data that came in, it morphed these lines for them perceptually, which is very strange. So those are two different things that happen to two different types of people. As far as I know, we don't know any difference between those types of people, between the people who see it correctly and decide to go along with it, and the ones who actually have their perception changed by this groupthink, I should say. So hold on to that information for a second, and we'll talk about this Milgram obedience study. Participants were asked to shock a person when they got a question wrong. The person, again, just like last time, is a confederate of the researcher. It's somebody that they're paying. And the researcher would say you have to shock them. They would flip the switch and shock the person who wasn't actually getting shocked. There's no shocking at all going on. They'd have to flip all these switches, and the person would get shocked with greater and greater amounts of electricity. Not really, but that's what they thought. And then the person who's getting shocked would stop responding. And the researcher says, no, you got to continue shocking them, and they do. Sometimes they don't want to. Sometimes they just go ahead and do it. And a lot of times they're worried. The person could be dead, and they're supposed to still continue shocking them. But they do it just because the researcher is telling them to. So what are we learning from this? Well, the first one is that when you're the only person who might have a different idea, a lot of times you'll conform to the group. The other thing is when there's a person in power who's saying something, a lot of people will just go along with it or even perceived power, not even true power. They'll go along with it. So I should say another thing about the Asch conformity study. If there is one other person in that group of confederates who says, I think the right answer is C, then the person who's actually being tested is much more likely to say C. They'll go along with what they actually think is the right answer, just if only one other person says it. So in both of these cases, the best way to avoid falling prey to these biases is simply to know about them. So now that you know about them, much less likely that it's going to happen to you. You know about the Asch conformity study, so if you ever see something that you don't think is right, you're going to be much more likely to go along with it. You're also aware that there's this bias to go along with what people in power say, even if you don't agree with it. By doing that, by disagreeing, you could be, that one person who makes the other people who are being swayed by the group also say what they think. So let's say, like we just talked about, this mask data. If you're in a group where it seems like this isn't something that they believe in, you shouldn't be swayed by that. You should look up the actual data. And by doing that, you might actually be that one person who then allows the other people to see the data for what it is. And again, going back to what we were talking about first, wow, there we go. This is your new role, right? Being in a medically adjacent field, being a health professional, that's what you're here to do, is promote health, save lives, keep people from being in danger, and also to promote scientific thought and reason. So this is a good time to, get started on that type of career. Okay. Wow, my PowerPoint is just jumping all over the place. So let's talk about me for a little bit. I was born in Mesa, Arizona. This is me, not this guy, but this one, the one that looks like me. That's me. And I graduated from, you're not going to know this if you're not from Arizona, so if you can totally tune out for like the next 2 seconds if you are not from Arizona. But if you are, I went to Hamilton for high school, and then I went to ASU for my BS and my master's and my PhD. And like I talked about, my PhD is in cognitive psychology, where I specialized in auditory and visual perception, and so that specializing in auditory perception is how I ended up at the ASU speech and hearing department. And then, as you can tell here, I'm also runner. Like to do a lot of the those obstacle courses and stuff like that, or anyway, I did when we could actually do them. I was this close in April to buying a pass to like one of the Spartan races in November, because I was like, well, there's not going to be a pandemic in November. That's ridiculous. Well, good thing I didn't buy it. Okay, so we'll talk about my research for one hot second. One of the things I like to look at, just very recently, I've gotten into looking at swear words, which is super fun. And what we uncovered was that it seems like we use phonemes at different rates for swear words than we do regular words. In fact, there are some specific phonemes that we use more. E is one that we use less. A is a phoneme that we use more for swear words. And actually, if you look at the harmonicity among vowel sounds, at least North American vowel sounds, A is the most dissonant, or I guess I should say least harmonic, the most inharmonic of the vowel sounds. Another one is and that one is not the most inharmonic, but it does come up for having a high negative valence in a couple other studies that other people have done, including some by me. So we show that with nonsense words that either have like an I or an E or an people will attach the to the most negative valence. Seems like it has kind of like a low arousal to the sound. And then A has kind of a negative association with that sound with our nonsense words. So then looking at swear words, we see that there's a lot more us and a lot more as. They're used way more. You can see right here in this graph. This is the right here. Nope, sorry. This is the a, and this is the and actually I should say, no, that's it. Is right here. Okay. So it looks like is not used as much in swear words here. But what's going on is the study that I took this data from, the white bar is the usage in control words, just all other words. They weren't differentiating between the sound, and schwa, the unstressed version of the sound. If you differentiate between and schwa, then becomes used far more than in typical words. So here, this study, this is from 1950. They weren't differentiating between and schwa. And then a different study from 1978 that actually used more samples did differentiate between and schwa. And so then what we see is that swear words use statistically more as and us. The opposite ends of those spectrums, the opposite end of the A spectrum is U, and the opposite end of the spectrum is E. And so you can actually see that U right here and E is right here. They actually have statistically fewer instances of those phonemes being used in swear words than in regular words. So there's something going on, some sort of sound symbolism that kind of informs what we use to make our swear words, or how words actually grow into becoming swear words. Because most of the swear words that we have weren't swear words when they were originated. They became swear words over time. And there are other words that were originated around the same time that then didn't become swear words. Two words that aren't really swears, but that kind of evolved along the same way is poop and crap. One is obviously worse than the other, but when they were originated, neither was really offensive. Not that they're totally offensive now, but they were around the same level of valence. And over time, crap became a little bit closer to a swear word than poop. And there's really no reason for that to happen aside from the sound of the word. Okay, so then another thing that I've been looking at is something called the dun-dun, which is this Nigerian talking drum. And what's really cool about this instrument is that it can be used as an instrument. In fact, it can be used as a really cool instrument because it's kind of like a drum and a bass guitar in one. So you can make it kind of go like boom, boom, because you can change the pitch just by like squeezing the sides of the drum where these straps are. If you squeeze it, it makes a higher pitch. So you hit it and you get this like drum sound. But then if you're changing the pitch along with it, you kind of get this like also kind of bass note that goes along with music. So that's cool. But in Nigeria, they're also used as something called a speech surrogate, which means that people can play these to sound like speech. And among people who are familiar with the instrument, they can actually understand what the drum is saying. So we're looking at how well the drum playing correlates with the actual speech sound. So what are they using from the speech sound? If you did take 375 with me, then you know that there are formants. There's F1, there's F2, there's the fundamental frequency, there is all sorts of different things that aren't changing at the same rate, right? So you can have phonemes where F1 goes up and F2 comes down as you move to that phoneme. And F0 might stay exactly the same. So what is the drummer doing? What are they following? Fundamental frequency, F1, F2? What? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. Looks like it's probably F1, a little bit F1 and a little bit fundamental frequency kind of tied together. But that's a pilot experiment. Maybe by the end of this semester I'll actually be able to tell you what's going on with that. But hopefully, because actually I have a paper that's on it that I'm supposed to have written by December. So I guess I should be able to tell you. And I'm starting to stress myself out. Anyway, let's move on. I'm also looking for some of my vision research. I'm looking into finding the fourth color cone in humans. Now, I know what you're thinking if you know about this. I mean, first of all, you might be thinking, I don't care. And then second, you might be thinking, I thought there were only 3 color cones. Yes, there is only 3 color cones in most people. But there's actually a few people who are confirmed to have 4 color cones. And there are 4 in the world who are confirmed to be tetrachromats genetically. And I'm in connection with 3 of them. 3 of the 4. 75% of these people I actually have as participants in my research. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Really exciting. We're hoping to be able to work with them to create a test to identify more. So if we can come up with a test that like I can't see because I'm not a tetrachromat, but that they can see, then we can distribute that and to anywhere in the world. Because right now the genetic testing is really only available to people in Western countries largely. But if we can come up with a test that's cheaper, easier, more portable, stuff like that, then we can send it around everywhere and figure out who might have tetrachromacy. What are the rates of tetrachromacy? What contributes to actually being able to see in more dimensions of color and stuff like that. Anyway, long story short, the reason I'm telling you about that in speech and hearing class is if you are a woman who has a colorblind dad or brother, you should totally email me, because you might be a tetrachromat. There's a chance that you are, based on the way that we think the genetics works. I mean, it's rare, so it's unlikely, but it could be. I mean, you never know. Somebody's gonna be, could be you. So anyway, if you have a colorblind dad or brother, then send me an email for sure. Okay, that is it. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about with the class, the way the class is set up? No, I don't think so. We talked about everything for your... Yes, there is something I wanted to talk about. Okay, so if you haven't done it already, which I know some of you have, I want to know what your favorite book is. I think this is the same thing that I used in 375, and I had forgotten that when I set it up. I try to go back and forth between like what's your favorite movie and what's your favorite book. I think I used book in 375, so if you're answering the same question again, sorry. I need to come up with more things, and then that way I won't end up using the same one for different classes. Problem is I have 3 different classes that I was teaching this time, and only 2 good questions that I could come up with, so then I ended up having to reuse one. But reading and writing really go along with language science, so I'm more happy with it here than I was in speech science. Anyway, I've got a couple of favorite books. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell is definitely one of them. It's a great book. I had my books here with me that I was going to pick up, and I misplaced them. Anyway, Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell is one of them. House of Leaves. Okay, so Cloud Atlas is kind of, it's like a little bit sci-fi, except it's weird. It kind of jumps around through time. So it's like a detective story. It's like some sort of old adventure, novel from the 1800s. It's super science fiction-y, like kind of Matrix style science fiction at one point, and then way crazy sci-fi towards the end, like post-apocalyptic kind of thing. So it's a really crazy book. If you like that kind of thing, you should totally read it. It's really good. House of Leaves is really great, really good for right now, for the next month, because it is a horror novel, but it's unlike any other horror novel I've ever read. I mean, it's not like a Stephen King book. It's more like a psychological terror. It's really weird, and it almost makes you feel like you're going crazy as you're reading it. It's really, 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 really good. I'm also really into anything by Chuck Palahniuk, Kurt Vonnegut. Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. It's fantastic. I'm really into detective novels, and that is usually considered to be the first detective novel, like before there were detective novels, right? So Poe was writing about private detectives solving crimes before there were private detectives solving crimes. So pretty cool on his part. I mean, all of his stuff is good, but this one in particular is cool for historical reasons, as well as just because it's a good story. So that's pretty much it. Am I leaving anything out that I wanted to talk about? Oh, the Scott Pilgrim series of they're actually graphic novels, not books, but they're excellent. If you've seen the movie, which is an excellent movie, um, the books are even better. I think there's 8, probably. That makes sense. There's 8 of them, and they're just as good as the movie, if not, better, just because there's more. So if you were into that movie, which if you haven't seen it, totally watch it. It's excellent. And also, I'm probably a little bit older than some of you, by about, I guess, 10 years. And but the music scene 10 years ago, man, was really cool. So like really, it's written from that era of music scene. It was cool stuff, like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and all sorts of stuff like that. So good memories with that as well. Anyway, that's it. That's your first assignment. Also, tag where you are. If you've already tagged where you are, I accidentally put in my map from summer, so I've got a new map. So sorry, you'll have to tag yourself again. But anyway, that'll give us a better idea of where everybody actually is. Like, you don't have to tag your exact house. That's not, if you don't want to. You can, but you don't have to. I tagged a mountain that I like to go to a lot, so you can do something like that as well. Okay, that is it for this video, which went on way longer than I anticipated. Sorry about that. But I will see you online. I'll talk to you about talk to some of you about your favorite books. So I'll see you there.